I'm Miranda, 28, and 3 months ago my entire family dynamic imploded because of a technological mishap. After our weekly Sunday video call, my parents forgot to hang up properly. I was about to close my laptop when I heard my mother's voice suddenly serious. Living with Miranda's failure is the hardest part. My blood ran cold. Through the still-connected call, I heard them discussing me with my sister Allison, their voices dripping with disappointment while they praised her accomplishments. Then came the bombshell about the inheritance and vacation home. In that moment, everything I believed about my family shattered. If you've ever felt that gut-wrenching moment when you discover what your family really thinks of you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if family drama stories resonate with you, and like this video if you've ever uncovered a family secret that changed everything. Let's dive into how an accidental phone call revealed the painful truth I was never meant to hear. Growing up in suburban Boston, our family of four presented the perfect picture to the outside world. My father, Robert, is a respected cardiologist at Massachusetts General Hospital. My mother, Patricia, a former nurse who became a full-time homemaker after having children. I was born first, followed 2 years later by my sister Allison. From an early age, the dynamics were subtly established. I was the responsible firstborn, the one who followed rules, got straight A's, and helped with chores without being asked. Allison was the charismatic younger sibling, bubbly and outgoing, the social butterfly who could charm anyone within minutes of meeting them. She had a natural gift for making people smile, while I was more reserved and analytical. Our family is a team, my father would always say during our Sunday dinners. We support each other no matter what. I believed that with my whole heart, even when I sensed subtle differences in how they treated us. When Allison received slightly more expensive gifts or more enthusiastic praise for identical achievements, I dismissed my observations as petty jealousy. I followed the path expected of me through high school student council president, National Honor Society, volunteer work at Dad's hospital. When college application time came, there was an unspoken expectation that I would follow my father into medicine. I was accepted to Johns Hopkins pre-med program, and everything seemed set. But during sophomore year, I took a marketing elective that changed everything. I discovered I had a passion and talent for strategic communication that medicine couldn't fulfill. After weeks of anxiety, I finally told my parents I was switching majors. Marketing? My father had repeated, as though the word tasted sour. You're throwing away a chance to make a real difference in the world to, what? Sell people things they don't need? My mother had been more diplomatic but equally disappointed. Honey, we just want what's best for you. Medicine is a stable, respected profession. Despite their reservations, I graduated with honors in marketing communications. The recession hit just as I entered the job market, and after months of unsuccessful applications, I reluctantly moved back into my childhood bedroom. Those 8 months at home were suffocating, filled with subtle reminders of my detour while Allison was thriving in her second year of medical school, following perfectly in our father's footsteps. Eventually, I landed an entry-level position at a marketing firm in Chicago. The starting salary barely covered my expenses, but I was determined to make it work. Meanwhile, Allison remained in Boston for medical school, with our parents covering her apartment, tuition, and living expenses. Something I never questioned because medical school is so demanding. As Mom would say, over the next 5 years, I worked my way up to marketing director at a mid-sized firm. I dated Blake, a graphic designer I met through work, for 3 years before our painful breakup 6 months ago. He wanted to relocate to Seattle for a dream job, and I couldn't leave the career I'd fought so hard to build. The breakup hit me harder than I expected, leaving me feeling unmoored and questioning my choices. Through it all, my parents seemed supportive on our weekly video calls. You'll find someone better suited for you, Mom would assure me. Everything happens for a reason, Dad would add philosophically. I took comfort in those conversations, believing they respected my independence even if they didn't fully understand my choices. I loved my small but stylish apartment in Chicago's Wicker Park neighborhood, though it stretched my budget to the breaking point some months. Occasionally, I'd need to ask my parents for help with an unexpected expense, a car repair, a medical bill which they provided, though usually with a reminder about learning to budget properly. The contrast between how they treated Allison and me became more pronounced after we both reached adulthood. For her 25th birthday, they gifted her a 2-week European vacation. For my 25th, I received a nice watch and dinner at my favorite restaurant. When I completed my MBA night classes while working full-time, they sent flowers. When Allison passed her medical boards, they threw an elaborate party with extended family and friends. Still, I never allowed myself to dwell on these differences. Families are complex, I reasoned. Perhaps they were simply responding to our different personalities and needs. Allison needed more external validation, while I was more self-sufficient. Or maybe medical achievements simply meant more to them because they understood that world better. Whatever subtle favoritism existed, I believed we were still fundamentally a loving, supportive family. My parents had raised me with good values, paid for my undergraduate education, and were there when I truly needed them. That was more than many people had, and I felt grateful. Until that fateful Sunday when the video call didn't end when it should have. Our weekly Sunday calls followed a predictable pattern. We'd catch up for about 30 minutes, me sharing work updates, Mom talking about her garden club, Dad discussing interesting medical cases, and occasionally Allison joining from her apartment across town from our parents. That Sunday had seemed no different. We'd chatted about normal things, my new project at work, Dad's golf game, Mom's book club selection before saying our goodbyes. I was about to close my laptop when I realized the call hadn't disconnected. My parents' iPad camera was facing the ceiling, but their voices came through clearly. I was about to speak up when I heard my name. Living with Miranda's failure is the hardest part, my mother said, her voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. I just don't understand how she went so off track. I froze, my finger hovering over the disconnect button. I know, my father replied with a sigh. All that potential, wasted on selling people things they don't need. Johns Hopkins pre-med too. What? Making advertisements? I heard movement, the sound of a door opening, and then Allison's voice. Hey, I brought the dessert you asked for. Thanks, sweetheart. My mother's voice immediately brightened. We were just talking about the contrast between you girls. Your father and I are so proud of how you've stayed the course. Miranda's not doing that badly, Allison said, her tone suggesting slight discomfort. Her company seems to value her work. Value? My father scoffed. She's 28 and still needs our financial help every few months. Meanwhile, you're about to finish your residency, with a fellowship lined up at one of the top hospitals in the country. And she still hasn't gotten over that Blake fellow, my mother added. 6 months, and she's still moping about it on our calls. At her age, I was already married to your father with you on the way, Allison. Not everyone has the same timeline, Mom, Allison replied. It's not just the timeline, my father said. It's the pattern of poor decisions. First throwing away medical school, then that marketing job that barely pays her bills, then letting a good relationship fall apart because she wouldn't compromise. My stomach clenched. Blake had received a job offer with a significant salary increase. I was the one who'd encouraged him to take it, knowing I couldn't leave my position in Chicago. We'd tried long distance for 2 months before accepting it wouldn't work. How had that become my poor decision? Speaking of financial matters, my father continued, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used for important discussions. Your grandmother's trust distribution is coming up next month. Your mother and I have been thinking. About the distribution split? Allison asked. Yes. The original plan was a 50-50 split between you girls, but given the circumstances, we've spoken to the attorney about adjusting it to a 70-30 division. 70% to me? Allison sounded surprised. It makes sense, my mother chimed in. You're finishing medical school with loans to repay, and you'll need a down payment on a house once you settle into your fellowship. Miranda chose a less practical path and needs to learn financial responsibility. What about the Aspen property? Allison asked. I thought Grandma wanted that shared equally. We've reconsidered that too, my father said, matter-of-factly. It makes more sense for you to have primary ownership, with Miranda having limited usage rights. You'll be able to afford the maintenance and property taxes. Miranda can't even afford her Chicago apartment without occasional help. I pressed my hand against my mouth, tears welling in my eyes. The vacation home had been our grandmother's pride and joy, a place where we'd spent summers together as a family. She had made us both promise to keep it in the family when she moved to her retirement community 5 years ago. Don't you think Miranda will be upset? Allison asked, her voice smaller now. She loves the Aspen house. She'll understand we're being practical, my mother dismissed. Besides, it's not like she visits often with her limited vacation time. I don't know, Allison hesitated. Honey, my father's voice softened, you're following the responsible path. You deserve the security this will provide. Miranda made her choices, and part of growing up is living with the consequences. I guess you're right, Allison conceded. I just don't want to hurt her feelings. Sometimes the truth hurts, my mother said firmly, but at least one of our daughters won't disappoint us. There was a moment of silence that felt like an eternity to me. I should probably call her this week, Allison said finally. She sounded stressed about work during the call. She's always stressed about something, my mother replied dismissively. That's what happens when you choose the wrong path. If she'd followed through with medical school like you planned, Allison corrected gently. Well, she had the aptitude, my father defended. She just lacked the commitment, not like you, sweetheart. I couldn't listen anymore. With trembling fingers, I finally clicked the disconnect button, ending the call that had just shattered my perception of my family. The silence in my apartment after disconnecting the call was deafening. I sat motionless, staring at my darkened laptop screen, my parents' words echoing in my mind. Living with Miranda's failure, wasted potential, at least one of our daughters won't disappoint us. The first tears fell silently, then gave way to deep, gut-wrenching sobs that left me gasping for air. I curled into a ball on my sofa, clutching a throw pillow against my chest, as if it could somehow protect me from the pain. Hours passed as I cycled through shock, disbelief, and devastating hurt. When my phone rang later that evening, my mother's name flashing on the screen, I stared at it until it stopped. She left a voicemail. Hi, sweetie. Just checking that you got home safely from your friend's place you mentioned. Talk soon. Love you. The casual normalcy of her message made my stomach turn. How could she sound so loving after what I'd heard? Sleep eluded me that night. I lay awake, replaying not just the conversation I'd overheard, but countless interactions with my family throughout my life. Little moments I'd dismissed took on new, painful significance. The time my parents attended 3 of Allison's soccer games in a row but missed my debate championship because of scheduling conflicts. The family dinner where my father had spent 20 minutes discussing Allison's medical school applications but changed the subject when I brought up my marketing internship. Monday morning arrived, and I moved through my routine like a ghost. I showered, dressed, and went to work, but everything felt surreal. During our team meeting, my boss Elaine asked me twice if I was feeling all right. Just didn't sleep well, I murmured, avoiding eye contact. By Wednesday, I had ignored 4 calls from my parents and 2 from Allison. I sent a brief text to my mother. Super busy with work deadline. Will call when things calm down. The lie bought me space I desperately needed. The physical symptoms of my emotional distress intensified. I lost my appetite, picking at food without tasting it. Dark circles formed under my eyes from consecutive nights of broken sleep. During a presentation at work, I lost my train of thought mid-sentence, something that had never happened before. Thursday evening, I finally answered a call not from family, but from Diane, my closest friend since college. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "I've texted you 3 times. "Something happened," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Can you come over?" 40 minutes later, Diane arrived at my door with a bottle of wine and takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant. One look at my face and she set everything down to pull me into a fierce hug. Over wine and barely touched pad Thai, I recounted the entire overheard conversation. Diane listened without interrupting, her expression growing increasingly outraged. "Those absolute jerks," she finally exploded when I finished. "How dare they say those things about you?" "The worst part is," I said, twisting my napkin into a tight spiral, "I'm starting to wonder if they've always felt this way. If every supportive word was just pretend." Diane set her wineglass down firmly. "Look, I've known your family for 8 years. I've spent holidays at your parents' house. And I've always thought there was something off about how they treated you compared to Allison." "What?" I looked up, startled. "You never said anything?" "Because you always defended them. Whenever I'd mention something, you'd say, 'Oh, that's just because Allison needs more encouragement,' or, 'They're just proud of her medical school accomplishments.' I figured if it didn't bother you, I shouldn't push it. I fell silent, recalling all the times I'd made excuses for the disparity in treatment. And that inheritance thing is straight up financial abuse, Diane continued angrily. Your grandmother wanted it split equally. They're literally stealing from you. I don't even know if it's legal, I admitted. The trust probably has specific terms. You should find out, Diane urged. But first, you need to sleep. Have you eaten anything substantial since Sunday? I shook my head, suddenly aware of how physically depleted I felt. That night, with Diane sleeping on my sofa after insisting she wouldn't leave me alone, I finally managed a few hours of restless sleep, but morning brought fresh waves of pain as reality settled in. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake from. During the next week, I moved through life on autopilot. At work, I focused on tasks requiring minimal creative input. At home, I alternated between numbness and periods of intense grief. I started a journal, pouring out thoughts I couldn't voice aloud. Was anything ever real? Every "I'm proud of you" from Dad? Every "I love you" from Mom? Were they just going through the motions? Have I been the family disappointment all along without knowing it? The questions haunted me. I found myself reviewing old family photos, searching for clues I might have missed. The forced smile on my mother's face as I graduated college with my marketing degree. My father's stiff posture beside me at my first apartment, compared to his relaxed pride in photos with Allison at her white coat ceremony. I began avoiding social media, unable to bear the perfect family images others posted. When a colleague mentioned visiting her parents for the weekend, I excused myself to the bathroom where I fought back tears. The calls and texts from my family continued. My mother's messages grew increasingly concerned. Miranda, please call us back. We're worried about you. My father's were more direct. Your mother is upset by your silence. Call home immediately. Allison's single text was brief. Hey sis, everything okay? Parents are freaking out a bit. I responded only with vague reassurances. Very busy. Everything fine. We'll call soon. Each message I sent felt like another small betrayal of myself, maintaining the family facade that had already crumbled in my eyes. 2 weeks after the call, I found myself sitting in my parked car outside my office building long after work hours ended, unable to summon the energy to drive home. The realization struck me then. I was grieving. Not for a person who had died, but for the death of what I believed my family to be. The loving, supportive unit I'd cherished existed only in my mind. The reality was something colder, conditional, and deeply painful. That night, I finally made a decision. I could no longer pretend nothing had changed. I needed answers, boundaries, and a path forward, whatever that might look like. With shaking hands, I texted my mother, "We'll be free to talk this weekend." Then I called the one person I knew could help me navigate the emotional minefield ahead. Should I pretend I never heard them, Jessica? I asked my therapist during our emergency session Friday afternoon. Just keep playing along with the loving family myth? Jessica, who I'd been seeing sporadically since my breakup with Blake, leaned forward in her chair. That's certainly an option. Many people choose to maintain family harmony by overlooking painful dynamics. The question is, can you live authentically that way? I stared out the window of her office, watching rain streak down the glass. Before hearing that conversation, maybe, but now, every interaction would feel like a lie. What about confronting them? Jessica suggested carefully. Not in an accusatory way, but opening a dialogue about how you perceive family dynamics? I'm terrified of that conversation, I admitted. What if they deny everything? Or worse, what if they confirm it all to my face? Those are both possibilities, Jessica acknowledged. But consider the alternative: carrying this unaddressed pain while maintaining superficial relationships. That creates its own kind of damage. For the next hour, we explored options. Jessica drew a diagram illustrating family dynamics, the golden child and scapegoat patterns that can emerge even in otherwise loving families. Seeing the framework laid out clinically provided some emotional distance from my pain. This isn't about good people versus bad people, Jessica emphasized. Parents often unconsciously recreate patterns from their own upbringing or project their aspirations onto their children unevenly. Understanding this doesn't excuse hurtful behavior but can help you process it less personally. After our session, I stopped at a bookstore and purchased 2 books Jessica had recommended on family dynamics and setting healthy boundaries. Over the weekend, I alternated between reading and journaling, piecing together a clearer picture of my family history. I realized my parents had always expected me, as the firstborn, to fulfill their dreams. My father had often mentioned how his own father pushed him toward medicine. Was he simply continuing the pattern? Allison, arriving later, perhaps benefited from their more relaxed expectations until she willingly chose the path they'd hoped for me. By Sunday evening, I'd filled pages with memories that now made painful sense. My father's lukewarm response to academic achievements outside science and math. My mother's subtle comparisons whenever Allison succeeded. The way family resources had always seemed more accessible to my sister. Most revealing was my financial analysis. I tracked every financial interaction with my parents since college. While they had fully covered Allison's medical school tuition, housing, and living expenses easily exceeding $300,000, their support for me had been limited to undergrad tuition and occasional loans during tough times that totaled less than $40,000. I'd repaid nearly half those loans, while Allison's education had been presented as a gift. The realization left me breathless with anger. My financial struggles, the tight budgets, the second job I'd taken for a year to make ends meet, all while my parents had resources they chose to direct primarily to Allison. Their narrative of my poor financial management crumbled in the face of this stark inequality. Monday morning, I called Diane during my lunch break. "I need to confront them," I said without preamble, "but I'm not sure how." "Direct approach," Diane replied immediately. "Rip the Band-Aid off. Tell them exactly what you heard and watch them try to justify it." "That feels so confrontational." "Miranda, they've been gaslighting you your entire adult life about your worth and your choices. Maybe confrontational is exactly what's needed." I considered her words carefully. "I'll think about it. But first, I want more information about Grandma's trust." That afternoon, I called the family attorney, Mr. Peterson, who had handled my grandmother's estate. Claiming I was just trying to plan my finances, I asked about the trust distribution timeline. "Ah, Miranda," he said warmly. "Yes, the Catherine Miller trust distributions are scheduled for final disbursement next month. Your parents requested some adjustments to the original terms, but I can't discuss those details with you directly. You should speak with them." "I thought Grandma wanted things split equally between Allison and me," I ventured. A pause. "That was certainly Catherine's expressed intention in our initial meetings. Again, you should discuss any concerns with your parents directly." The confirmation was all I needed. My grandmother had intended equal treatment, but my parents were actively working to change that. The final piece fell into place when I received an email from my father's secretary. Sent to both Allison and me, it contained information about the family's upcoming annual insurance review, including property schedules. There, in black and white, was documentation about the Aspen vacation home. My name had been removed as a future co-owner, replaced by a note about limited usage rights. That night, I made my decision. I texted my mother, "Coming to Boston this Saturday, important family matters to discuss. Please make sure Dad and Allison are there for dinner." Her reply came quickly. Wonderful surprise. Dad's grilling steaks. Allison confirmed too. "So happy you're coming home, sweetie." The endearment made my stomach turn. The fairy tale of our perfect family was about to end, but at least it would end on my terms. I know many of you have faced moments when you had to decide between uncomfortable truth or comforting silence. If this story resonates, take a moment to hit that like button. Sometimes the hardest conversations are exactly what we need to move forward. I'll share what happened at that fateful family dinner right after this brief pause. The days before my Boston trip were a blur of preparation and investigation. Having opened the door to financial questions, I couldn't close it again. What began as simple record-keeping turned into a deep dive into family financial dynamics that left me increasingly disturbed. First, I searched my email archives for anything related to my grandmother's estate. 3 years earlier, when she moved to assisted living, there had been a family meeting where Miss Peterson outlined her estate plans. I found my notes from that meeting. Trust split equally between granddaughters upon final distribution. Vacation property to be jointly owned with equal responsibilities and privileges. Those clear instructions contrasted sharply with what was now happening. I forwarded the email to my personal lawyer, Rachel, asking for a consultation about trust modifications. Generally speaking, Rachel explained during our call, unless the trust was created with provisions allowing modifications, changes typically require consent from all beneficiaries or a court order demonstrating the changes align with the creator's intent. Have you received any formal documentation about proposed changes? Nothing, I confirmed. I only know about it because I overheard a conversation not meant for me. That's concerning, Rachel said carefully. I'd recommend requesting formal documentation from the trustee before the distribution occurs. You have rights as a beneficiary. Next, I searched through old financial records. I found the promissory notes for the loans my parents had given me, all with detailed repayment terms. In contrast, I uncovered emails discussing Allison's medical school tuition payments, explicitly described as gifts that never need to be repaid because you're investing in your future. The disparity was stark. During the recession when I'd moved home, I'd been charged nominal rent, $300 monthly, to teach financial responsibility. Meanwhile, Allison had lived rent-free in an apartment my parents purchased near her medical school, an apartment I now learned they had put in her name, essentially gifting her a valuable real estate asset. Most revealing was an email chain I discovered between my parents and Allison from 2 years ago, discussing a monthly stipend to cover her living expenses during residency, an arrangement I'd never been offered or even knew existed. The stipend amount exceeded what I'd asked to borrow for car repairs last year, a request my father had accompanied with a lecture about emergency funds and financial planning. My father, ever the methodical doctor, had apparently kept meticulous records of financial support to both daughters. I found a spreadsheet he'd accidentally shared with me years ago while sending tax documents. Opening it now, I discovered columns tracking every dollar provided to each daughter since college, categorized as investment, Allison's education and housing, versus assistance, my occasional needs. The totals were shocking. Over $450,000 invested in Allison's future versus less than $50,000 for me, much of which I'd repaid. More telling were the notes in the margins. A's medical career ROI justifies additional investment, and M needs to learn self-sufficiency. My shock turned to righteous anger. All those years of stretching my entry-level salary, taking on freelance projects, and carefully budgeting while watching Allison enjoy a comfortable lifestyle, I'd attributed the difference to our career choices, never suspecting the extent to which my parents had engineered our disparate circumstances. On Thursday, I made my boldest move. I called my grandmother directly at her retirement community. "Miranda, darling, what a lovely surprise," she greeted me warmly. After brief pleasantries, I carefully broached the subject. "Grandma, I've been thinking about the trust you set up for Allison and me. It was so generous of you." "Family takes care of family," she said simply. "Your grandfather and I worked hard so you girls would have advantages we didn't. I'm just wondering, did you have specific intentions for how it should be divided?" There was a pause. "Equal shares, of course. You girls are both my granddaughters. I don't play favorites." "And the Aspen house?" I pressed gently. "Joint ownership," she said firmly. "That house holds our family memories. Summer vacations, Christmas gatherings, it belongs to both of you equally." She paused again. "Why are you asking, dear? Has something changed?" I couldn't bring myself to upset her. "Just planning for the future, Grandma. Thank you for confirming." My final discovery came Friday night as I packed for Boston. Searching for my birth certificate in my files, I found documents from my college graduation, including a letter from my grandmother I'd forgotten about. Inside was a check for $25,000 with a note. "A graduation gift to help you start your new life. I've sent the same to the trustee for Allison when she graduates medical school. I believe in both your paths equally." I never received that money. When I'd mentioned the check to my parents at graduation, my father had suggested I let him invest it properly for me. Subsequent questions about the investment were met with vague reassurances until I eventually stopped asking. Now I understood the money had likely been redirected to Allison's more worthy pursuits. By the time I boarded my flight to Boston Saturday morning, my briefcase contained a folder of evidence documenting years of financial inequality. The trust notes, the spreadsheet, emails about property transfers, documentation of the redirected graduation gift, and calculations showing the massive disparity in support. The evidence was irrefutable. This wasn't about career choices or different needs, it was a systematic pattern of favoritism with significant financial impact. My parents hadn't just preferred Allison emotionally, they had actively created two different financial realities for their daughters. As the plane took off, I felt a strange calm replace the turmoil of the past weeks. I was no longer questioning my perception or memories. I wasn't crazy or oversensitive or financially irresponsible. I had been working with far fewer resources than my sister, by deliberate parental design, while simultaneously being criticized for the resulting struggles. The narrative of my adult life, the responsible but slightly disappointing daughter who couldn't quite get her finances together despite a good job, had been carefully constructed by my parents to justify their unequal treatment. That narrative was about to be challenged with hard evidence. By the time the plane touched down in Boston, I felt something I hadn't experienced since overhearing that devastating conversation: strength. I wasn't going to my childhood home to have an emotional breakdown or make accusations. I was going to present facts, demand accountability, and reclaim my dignity. Whatever happened at dinner that night would forever change our family. But for the first time, I was prepared to accept that change, even if it meant losing the illusion of the loving, supportive family I had always thought I had. The familiar drive from Logan Airport to my parents' Brookline home felt surreal. Every landmark, the gas station where Dad taught me to pump gas, the ice cream shop where we celebrated good report cards, the park where Mom taught Allison and me to ride bikes, now seemed to belong to a different life, a different family than the one I was about to confront. I arrived intentionally early, at 4:30 for a 6 dinner. My mother opened the door, her face lighting up with genuine-seeming pleasure. "Miranda, we've missed you so much." She pulled me into a tight hug that I returned stiffly. If she noticed my reservation, she didn't show it. "Your father's picking up the stakes, and Allison should be here by 5:30. Come in, come in. I want to hear all about Chicago." The house was exactly as I remembered, family photos adorning the walls, the slight scent of my mother's favorite candles, the comfortable disorder of my father's medical journals on the coffee table. I set my overnight bag and briefcase by the staircase and followed my mother to the kitchen, where she poured us each a glass of white wine. "You look tired, sweetie," she observed, handing me a glass. "Is work still stressful?" "Work is fine," I replied neutrally. "How's the garden club?" For the next 30 minutes, I engaged in the most difficult performance of my life, making small talk while my heart pounded and my briefcase of evidence sat just out of sight. My mother chatted about neighbors, friends, and local gossip while I nodded and sipped wine that tasted like nothing. My father arrived at 5:15, greeting me with his usual brisk affection, a kiss on the forehead, and a quick, "Good to see you, kiddo," before turning his attention to dinner preparations. At 5:40, the front door opened again. "Hello? I brought dessert," Allison's voice called from the hallway. "We're all in the kitchen," Mom replied cheerfully. Allison appeared in the doorway, looking slightly hesitant when she saw me. "Miranda, I didn't realize you'd be here already." She set down a bakery box and gave me a quick hug. "How was your flight?" "Fine," I said, studying her face. Did she look guilty, uncomfortable, or was I projecting? Dinner preparation continued, with the four of us falling into familiar patterns: Dad grilling, Mom finishing side dishes, Allison setting the table, me mixing salad. The normalcy of it all made what I was about to do even more difficult. At 6:20, we gathered around the dining room table. My father poured red wine while my mother served garlic mashed potatoes and asparagus alongside his perfectly grilled steaks. Allison chattered about a challenging case from her residency, while my mother gazed at her with obvious pride. I waited until everyone had taken a few bites, the compliments on the food exchanged, before setting down my fork deliberately. "I need to discuss something important with all of you," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. My mother looked up, surprised by my serious tone. "Of course, dear. What is it?" I took a deep breath. 2 weeks ago, when we ended our Sunday video call, you didn't actually disconnect properly. I could still hear you, all of you. The effect was immediate. My mother's face drained of color. My father froze with his wine glass halfway to his lips. Allison's eyes widened as she realized the implications. "I heard everything," I continued into the silence, "about my failure, my wasted potential, about living with disappointment in me." About the trust distribution changes and the Aspen house. All of it. Miranda, my father began, setting down his glass carefully. I think you've misunderstood. I don't think I misunderstood anything, I interrupted, reaching for my briefcase beside my chair. In fact, since that call, I've done quite a bit of research to confirm what I heard. I removed the folder and placed it on the table beside my plate. I have documentation of the financial disparities between how you've treated Allison and me over the years. The calculations are quite revealing. My mother found her voice. Miranda, families aren't accounting ledgers. We've supported both our daughters as needed. As you deemed necessary, I corrected, and those determinations have consistently favored Allison by a factor of nearly 10 to 1. That's medical school, my father interjected. Of course it's expensive. If you'd chosen to follow that path, this goes far beyond tuition, I cut in. It includes housing, monthly stipends, graduation gifts redirected, property ownership. The pattern is systematic and deliberate. I turned to Allison, whose face reflected growing discomfort. Did you know about Grandma's graduation gift to me that was supposedly invested but never given to me? No, she whispered, looking genuinely shocked. I didn't. What about the trust changes? Are you comfortable receiving 70% when Grandma specifically wanted an equal split? Allison looked at our parents, then back to me. I thought you'd agreed to the changes. Dad said you understood the practical considerations. My father's face tightened. This is family business that doesn't need to be aired like dirty laundry. We've made decisions based on what makes financial sense for everyone. No, I said firmly. You've made decisions based on who followed your approved life path and who didn't. You've punished me financially for choosing marketing over medicine, then blamed me for the resulting financial struggles. My mother began to cry. We've always wanted what's best for you, Miranda. Sometimes parents have to make difficult choices, like deciding which daughter deserves support and which one deserves judgment, I asked. Like telling one daughter her education is a valuable investment while treating the others as a wasteful expense? You're twisting things, my father said, anger creeping into his voice. We've supported both of you. Unequally, I finished, and then criticized me for not achieving the same financial stability you helped Allison build. Do you not see how fundamentally unfair that is? The conversation devolved into a chaotic mixture of defensiveness, tears, and accusations. My father claimed I was taking things out of context, that parental support wasn't meant to be mathematically equal but responsive to different needs. My mother alternated between tearful apologies for hurting my feelings and insistence that I was overreacting to a single overheard conversation. Allison sat in uncomfortable silence until I addressed her directly. Did you know the extent of what they've given you compared to me? She hesitated. Not exactly. I knew they were covering my expenses, but I assumed they were doing similar things for you based on what you needed. And the Aspen house? Did you think it was fair for you to have primary ownership when Grandma wanted us to share it equally? Dad said you weren't interested in maintaining it, she replied quietly. That you preferred having your freedom rather than property responsibility. I turned to my father. Another lie. After nearly an hour of increasingly circular arguments, I'd heard enough justifications and evasions. I stood up, my dinner barely touched. I've spent years believing we were a close, supportive family despite subtle signs to the contrary. I made excuses for the differences in how you treated us, convinced myself it was my perception rather than reality. But the evidence is clear, and your responses tonight have only confirmed what I now know to be true. I looked at each of them in turn. You have consistently favored Allison emotionally, practically, and financially. You've actively created different opportunities for us while maintaining the fiction of equal treatment. Worst of all, you've blamed me for the very struggles your decisions helped create. Miranda, please, my mother began, reaching for my hand. I stepped back. I'm not finished. Going forward, these are my boundaries. I want my full and equal share of grandmother's trust, as she intended. I want joint ownership of the Aspen property, as she specified. And I want acknowledgement of the pattern of favoritism that has shaped our family dynamics. My father's face had turned stony. You're being unreasonable and melodramatic. Families aren't democracies where everything is precisely equal. No, but they should be places of fundamental fairness and honesty, I replied, neither of which I've received. I gathered my folder and briefcase. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight, not here. I've made an appointment with Mr. Peterson for Monday morning to discuss the trust directly. And I've spoken with Grandma about her intentions for both the trust and the property. That final revelation sent visible shock across my parents' faces. They hadn't expected me to involve my grandmother. You had no right, my father began. She had every right, Allison interrupted, surprising everyone. She looked at me with what appeared to be genuine remorse. Miranda's correct. We should honor Grandma's wishes for equal distribution, and we should acknowledge that things haven't been equal. My parents turned to Allison with identical expressions of betrayal. The golden child had broken ranks. I'll be in touch about the trust resolution, I said quietly. Beyond that, I need time to decide what kind of relationship I want with this family moving forward. I walked out of the dining room, collected my overnight bag, and left the house where I'd grown up believing in a family that never truly existed. Behind me, I could hear my mother sobbing, and my father's raised voice directed at Allison. The carefully maintained facade of family harmony had finally shattered completely. As I drove to my hotel, I felt an unexpected sense of lightness alongside the pain. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up for my worth instead of accepting less than I deserved in the name of family peace. Whatever came next would be difficult, but it would be based on truth rather than comforting illusions. The family I thought I had was gone, but perhaps something more authentic could eventually take its place. The aftermath of the confrontation was immediate and intense. I checked into a hotel near Boston Common, my hands still shaking slightly as I swiped the keycard to my room. I'd barely set down my bags when my phone began vibrating with messages. My father's text came first. Your behavior tonight was childish and disrespectful. When you're ready to discuss this rationally without accusations, let us know. My mother's followed minutes later. Please come back home, sweetheart. We can work through this misunderstanding as a family. Allison's arrived last, more tentative. I had no idea about most of what you brought up. Can we talk privately tomorrow? I silenced my phone and stood at the window, watching city lights flicker across the darkening skyline. The family narrative had always been clear. We supported each other, communicated openly, and shared everything. That story had been exposed as fiction, but the question remained, what would take its place? Sunday morning brought fresh messages. My father had moved from anger to tactical negotiation. Your mother is very upset. I'm willing to discuss trust adjustments if you'll agree to family counseling. My mother continued her emotional appeals. Please don't throw away our relationship over financial matters. We love you so much, Miranda. I responded to neither, but agreed to meet Allison for coffee at a neutral location. She was waiting when I arrived at the cafe, 2 untouched cappuccinos on the table. I didn't sleep at all, she admitted as I sat down. After you left, everything exploded. Dad kept saying you were being manipulative and unreasonable. Mom just cried. I tried to suggest they might be wrong, and Dad actually told me to stay out of it since I was the cause of the problem. You're not the cause, I said carefully. Their choices are. Allison stared into her coffee. I never realized how different our experiences have been. When you talked about the graduation gift from Grandma that you never received, she shook her head. I got mine directly into my bank account when I graduated. I assumed you had too. There's a lot you don't know, I said. Just as there was a lot I didn't know until recently. I feel terrible, she whispered. I've benefited from their favoritism without even realizing the extent of it. Did you really not notice? I asked, unable to keep the skepticism from my voice. The tuition payments, the apartment, the monthly stipends? I knew I was getting help, she acknowledged, but I thought you were too, just in different ways. When I asked about it once, Mom said you were fiercely independent and preferred making your own way. I believed them. We talked for nearly 2 hours, comparing our vastly different experiences of the same family. For every struggle I'd faced, Allison had received support. For every achievement I'd had to fight for, she'd been given resources and encouragement. I don't know what to do, she finally said. I can't give back what I've already received, but I don't feel right keeping the trust and property distributions as they're planning. You can support equal distribution going forward, I suggested. That would be a start. She nodded firmly. I already told Dad this morning I won't accept anything other than a 50-50 split, He didn't take it well. By Monday, the situation had escalated beyond our immediate family. My father's sister, Aunt Catherine, called while I was preparing for my meeting with Mr. Peterson. "Your father is furious," she began without preamble. "He claims you're trying to manipulate the family with false accusations." I braced myself for more invalidation. "Is that what you believe?" "No," she replied, surprising me. "I believe you finally saw what I've observed for years." "What do you mean?" "Miranda, your father did the same thing to me and my brother. He was the golden child who became a doctor while we were the disappointments who chose other paths. It's a family pattern that goes back generations." Her revelations stunned me. "You never said anything." "Would you have believed me?" she asked gently. "Sometimes people need to discover these dynamics themselves to accept them." That same day, my grandmother called, her voice worried. "Your mother says you're upset about the trust distribution." "She claims you misunderstood something I said." Carefully, I explained the situation, including the changes my parents had been arranging without my knowledge. "That is absolutely not what I intended," she said firmly. "I've already called Mr. Peterson to clarify my wishes in writing. The distribution will be equal, as originally planned, and the Aspen property will be jointly owned. Robert cannot change my explicit instructions." Her support brought the first tears I'd shed since the confrontation. "Thank you, Grandma." "Family favoritism is a poison, Miranda," she said softly. "I watched it destroy relationships in my generation. I won't allow it in yours." By the end of the week, family members had divided into distinct camps. My father's parents supported his position, suggesting I was making mountains out of molehills. My mother's younger sister initially defended them but changed her stance after seeing some of the financial documentation I'd gathered. Allison remained caught in the middle, unwilling to completely break with our parents but increasingly uncomfortable with their justifications. The most surprising support came from my cousin Mark, who called unexpectedly Friday evening. "I heard what happened from Aunt Catherine," he said. "I just wanted you to know I believe you. Dad and Uncle Robert have always played favorites with their children. It's like a family curse." "How do you break a family curse?" I asked, only half joking. "By naming it," he replied seriously. "Which is exactly what you've done." Meanwhile, the meeting with Mr. Peterson had gone exactly as my grandmother predicted. The trust could not be modified without all beneficiaries' consent, which I firmly withheld. The vacation property would remain jointly owned as originally specified. My financial interests were protected, but the emotional damage to our family seemed beyond repair. My parents' messages evolved as they realized the legal situation wouldn't favor them. My father shifted to minimizing his intentions. "We were only considering these changes as options, not definite plans." My mother tried emotional reconciliation. "Whatever mistakes we've made, nothing is worth destroying our family over." 3 weeks after the confrontation, I returned to Chicago, my legal position secure but my emotional state still raw. I'd exchanged more messages with Allison, who seemed genuinely remorseful and determined to establish a more honest relationship with me, independent of our parents. My parents continued reaching out with increasing desperation, as they realized their usual tactics weren't working. When guilt trips failed, "Your mother cried all weekend," they tried financial leverage. "We've helped you through tough times, don't forget that." When that didn't work, they attempted family pressure, asking relatives to talk sense into Miranda. None of it moved me. The pattern was too clear now to unsee. Each message only confirmed what I'd learned from that accidental phone call. My place in the family had always been conditional, subject to approval of my choices and compliance with their expectations. 1 month after the confrontation, I received a letter, an actual paper letter from my father. Unlike his previous messages, this one acknowledged, however reluctantly, that their treatment had been unequal. "While your mother and I still believe we made decisions based on different needs and circumstances," he wrote, "we recognize that the impact of those decisions created a disparity we didn't fully appreciate. We would like to begin repairing our relationship if you're willing." It wasn't a full admission or apology, but it was the first crack in the wall of denial. I didn't respond immediately, taking time to consider what kind of relationship I wanted with parents who had fundamentally betrayed my trust. The answer wasn't simple. Complete estrangement felt unnecessarily harsh, but returning to our previous dynamic was impossible. The truth lay somewhere in between a limited relationship with clear boundaries and revised expectations. 2 months after the confrontation, I finally responded to my father's letter. I'm open to beginning a conversation about our relationship moving forward, with the understanding that it will be different than before. I suggest we start with family counseling, as you previously mentioned. It was a small step toward an uncertain future, but it was a step I took from a position of strength rather than illusion. The family I thought I had was gone forever, but perhaps something more authentic could eventually take its place. 3 months after discovering my parents' true feelings, I sat across from Jessica in her therapy office, marveling at how much had changed. When I first came to you after overhearing that conversation, I was barely functioning, I reflected. Now I feel like I'm building a new life, one that's actually mine. Jessica smiled. The transformation has been remarkable. What aspects feel most significant to you? I considered the question carefully. The financial independence, definitely. Getting promoted to senior marketing director with that 15% raise couldn't have come at a better time. The promotion had been unexpected but not unearned. During the weeks of family turmoil, I'd channeled my emotional energy into work, developing an innovative campaign that caught the attention of executive leadership. My boss Elaine had cited my fresh creative approach and exceptional focus under pressure when announcing my promotion. The raise allowed me to move to that slightly larger apartment I'd been eyeing in Lincoln Park, I continued. No more stretching my budget to the breaking point or worrying about asking for help if an emergency came up. Financial security had brought a profound sense of peace. For years, I'd internalized my parents' narrative that my struggles were due to poor planning or irresponsible choices. Now I understood that I'd actually been remarkably resourceful with limited support. What about your relationships? Jessica asked. You mentioned making some changes there as well. I've been much more intentional about who I spend time with, I explained. Diane has been amazing throughout this whole process, but I've also reconnected with old friends I'd drifted away from, like Stephanie from college. Stephanie and I had been close throughout university before gradually losing touch. Reaching out to her had been surprisingly easy, and our rekindled friendship brought a different perspective to my life, someone who knew me before the family revelations but wasn't entangled in the aftermath. And I've been spending more time with Aunt Catherine, I added. We talk weekly now. She understands the family dynamics better than anyone, and there's something healing about that validation. My relationship with my aunt had developed into something precious, part mentorship, part friendship, part family connection that felt genuine rather than obligatory. She shared stories about my father's childhood that helped me understand how he had recreated patterns from his own upbringing, providing context without excusing the harm. What about your parents and Allison? Jessica asked carefully. Complicated, I admitted. We've had 2 sessions with the family therapist so far. My parents are trying, I think. They're not fully accepting responsibility yet, but they're listening more than they used to. The family therapy sessions had been difficult. My father struggled with defensiveness, my mother with emotional deflection. But small moments of breakthrough occurred, like when my father acknowledged feeling pressure from his own father to become a doctor, or when my mother admitted she'd always found it easier to connect with Allison's personality than mine. And Allison has been surprisingly supportive, I continued. She's established some boundaries with them too, which I think shocked them more than anything I did. My sister had followed through on her promise to reject the unequal trust distribution. More significantly, she'd begun questioning other family patterns, including the emotional pressure she felt to fulfill our parents' dreams. She told me last week that she's considering a different medical specialty than what Dad had always pushed for, I said. Pediatrics instead of cardiology. It's a small rebellion, but meaningful. And personally? Jessica prompted. How are you feeling about yourself these days? I smiled, more confident. I'm taking that photography class I always wanted to try but thought was frivolous. I'm speaking up more in meetings at work. And I've started dating again. Tell me about that, Jessica encouraged. His name is Daniel. We met at a marketing conference last month. He's creative, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in my work, not just tolerating it like Blake did. Daniel was different from anyone I'd dated before. Where Blake had been charming but somewhat self-absorbed, Daniel listened intently. Where previous partners had subtly reinforced my parents' narratives about practical career choices, Daniel found my passion for marketing genuinely interesting. Most importantly, I added, I'm being more authentic from the start. No more downplaying my ambitions or pretending certain things don't matter to me just to keep the peace. That's significant progress, Jessica noted. What about the lingering emotional impact of what happened? There are still difficult days, I acknowledged. Sometimes I'll remember a childhood moment that suddenly looks completely different in light of what I know now. But those revelations don't devastate me anymore. They're just part of a clearer understanding of my history. The journal I'd started during the initial crisis had become a valuable tool for processing these realizations. Writing had helped me track my emotional progress and identify lingering points of pain that needed attention. The biggest change, I said after a moment's reflection, is that I no longer measure my worth by their approval. For 28 years, I was trying to earn the unconditional love I thought was already mine. Now I know it wasn't, and paradoxically, that knowledge has freed me. Jessica nodded. That's profound insight, Miranda. How would you describe your current relationship with your family? Limited but evolving, I replied. We talk once every 2 weeks instead of weekly. The conversations are more surface level for now. I'm not sharing as much about my personal life or career while we rebuild trust. The boundaries I'd established had initially been met with resistance. My mother especially struggled with the reduced contact, sending multiple messages between our scheduled calls that I had to gently but firmly decline to engage with. I'm not looking for revenge or trying to punish them, I explained. I just need to protect myself while figuring out what kind of relationship is possible going forward. Financial matters had been resolved according to my grandmother's original intentions. The trust distribution would be equal, with disbursements beginning the following month. The vacation home would remain jointly owned, with clear documentation of equal usage rights and responsibilities. And how has this experience changed how you see yourself? Jessica asked. I considered the question carefully. I used to think of myself as the slightly disappointing daughter who couldn't quite get her life together despite opportunities. Now I recognize I was actually incredibly resourceful and resilient, building a successful career with a fraction of the support my sister received. That realization had been perhaps the most healing of all, not just that my parents had treated me unfairly, but that I had accomplished more than I'd given myself credit for in the face of that inequity. I'm proud of myself, I said, the words feeling unfamiliar but right. Not just for standing up to them, but for everything I've built on my own terms. As our session ended, Jessica offered a final observation. Family patterns are powerful, Miranda. Breaking them takes tremendous courage. Whatever relationship you ultimately establish with your parents, you've already succeeded in the most important way by refusing to carry those patterns forward in your own life. Walking out of her office into the bright Chicago afternoon, I felt lighter than I had in months. The family I thought I had was gone, but the life I was building now felt more authentic, more wholly mine, than anything that had come before. 1 year after the accidental phone call that changed everything, I stood on the porch of my grandmother's house in Concord, gathering courage before entering her 80th birthday celebration. Inside waited my entire extended family, including my parents and Allison. You ready for this? Daniel asked beside me, squeezing my hand supportively. I nodded, appreciating his steady presence. After 6 months of dating, he understood the complexity of my family situation and had offered to accompany me for moral support. Remember, he said gently, you've done the hard work. Today is about celebrating your grandmother, not fixing everything with your parents. I know, I agreed, one conversation at a time. We entered to the cheerful chaos of a family gathering. My grandmother spotted me immediately, her face lighting up as she made her way through relatives to embrace me. Miranda! And this must be Daniel, she exclaimed, pulling him into a hug as well. I've been looking forward to meeting you. Happy birthday, Grandma, I said, handing her a carefully wrapped package. This is from both of us. Inside was a custom photo album I'd created, filled with restored vintage photos of the Aspen house through the decades, alongside recent pictures I'd taken during my first solo visit there 3 months earlier. The final pages showed the sunrise from the porch swing her favorite spot. Oh, Miranda, she breathed, turning the pages slowly. This is perfect. You always understand what matters most. From across the room, I spotted my parents watching our interaction. My mother offered a tentative smile while my father nodded formally. Our relationship had evolved into something I'd never imagined a year ago. Not the unquestioning closeness of before, nor the complete estrangement I'd initially feared, but something carefully negotiated with professional help. Family therapy had continued monthly, gradually revealing layers of generational patterns. My father had begun acknowledging how his own father's favoritism toward him had shaped his parenting approach. My mother had started recognizing how her own insecurities had led her to overvalue certain achievements and life paths. Progress came in small moments rather than dramatic breakthroughs. The first time my father asked about my marketing work with genuine interest rather than veiled disappointment. The day my mother admitted she'd struggled to understand my independent nature because it was so different from her own. The family dinner where they both listened to my perspective without interruption or defensiveness. Allison approached, balancing a plate of appetizers. "Have you seen the cake yet? It's incredible." Our sisterly relationship had undergone perhaps the most significant transformation. Freed from the competitive dynamic our parents had fostered, we'd discovered a genuine friendship based on mutual respect rather than comparison. She'd completed her residency and chosen pediatric oncology, a decision our father had initially criticized as less prestigious than cardiology, before reluctantly accepting her choice. "How was your presentation in New York last week?" she asked, referring to a marketing conference where I'd been invited to speak. "It went really well," I replied. "The case study on our sustainable packaging campaign got great feedback." "I'm not surprised," she said sincerely. "Your portfolio is amazing." There was no trace of the condescension that might have colored similar conversations in the past. We'd learned to celebrate each other's accomplishments without ranking their value or importance. Throughout the party, I navigated family interactions with a new awareness. Aunt Catherine winked at me from across the room, our silent acknowledgement of how far I'd come. My father's parents maintained their usual emotional distance, while my mother's relatives made greater efforts to engage with me directly rather than through my parents as intermediaries. Eventually, the moment I'd been anticipating arrived. My mother approached while I was alone, refilling my water glass. "The photo album for your grandmother was a lovely idea," she said. "You've always been thoughtful that way." "Thank you," I replied. She mentioned wanting more photos of the Aspen house. I thought this might be special for her. An awkward silence fell between us, the kind that often emerged when we exhausted safe topics but hesitated to venture into deeper territory. "Miranda," she began finally, "your father and I have been talking a lot about everything. The therapist suggested we might be ready to have a more direct conversation about what happened last year." I nodded cautiously. "I think that might be possible now. We got so many things wrong," she continued, her voice wavering slightly. "We never intended to hurt you, but that doesn't change the fact that we did." It wasn't a perfect apology, but it contained something I'd never heard from her before, acknowledgement without qualification or excuses. "I know you didn't set out to hurt me," I replied carefully. "But the impact was still real, regardless of intent." She nodded. "We understand that better now. Your father especially has been doing a lot of reflection about his own upbringing and how it affected his parenting." As if summoned by her words, my father approached, carrying 2 pieces of birthday cake. "Thought you might want some," he offered, handing me a plate. "Your grandmother insisted on serving it now rather than waiting." The gesture bringing me cake unprompted would have seemed insignificant before. Now I recognized it as his awkward attempt at care, a small step toward a new way of relating. "Thanks, Dad," I said, accepting both the cake and the gesture for what they were, imperfect but genuine. "Your work portfolio," he said abruptly. "The one you shared last month." I looked through it properly. The healthcare campaign was impressive, very strategic thinking. Coming from him, this represented significant progress. A year ago, he would have found a way to compare my work unfavorably to medical accomplishments, or suggested it was merely clever rather than meaningful. "Thank you," I replied. "That project was challenging but rewarding." He nodded, clearly reaching the limit of his comfort with direct communication. "Well, your grandmother's waiting to cut the second cake. We should join everyone." As we moved toward the dining room, I caught Daniel's eye across the room. He raised an eyebrow in silent question, and I gave him a small smile and nod. The conversation had been awkward but important, another step in the gradual reconstruction of our family relationship. Later, as guests began departing, my grandmother pulled me aside. "I see the changes," she said quietly, "in all of you." "We're trying," I acknowledged. "It's not perfect, but it's more honest than before." "Perfect is impossible in families," she replied wisely. "Authentic is better anyway." She squeezed my hand. "When I made that trust and the arrangements for the Aspen house, I wanted to provide equally for both my granddaughters. But the most valuable inheritance isn't financial, Miranda. It's the courage to break harmful patterns and build something better." On the flight back to Chicago the next day, Daniel and I discussed the weekend. "What struck me most," he observed, "was how differently you carry yourself around them now. Last night you spoke your mind several times without apologizing or second-guessing yourself." He was right. The transformation wasn't just in how my family treated me, but in how I engaged with them. I no longer sought approval or acceptance. I now understood might never fully come. Instead, I interacted from a place of self-worth that existed independent of their validation. The trust distribution had occurred exactly as my grandmother intended, equal shares that provided both Allison and me with significant financial security. The vacation property remained jointly owned, with a formal usage agreement that ensured equal access and responsibilities. More importantly, the psychological inheritance of family patterns had been interrupted. Through therapy, reading, and painful but necessary conversations, we'd brought multi-generational patterns of favoritism and conditional love into the light where they could be examined and gradually changed. Our family would never be what I once believed it to be. The illusion of unconditional support and equal treatment had been permanently shattered. But something more authentic had begun to take its place, a relationship based on reality rather than fantasy, with boundaries that protected me while allowing connection to continue. 3 weeks after the birthday celebration, I received an email from my father with a link to a medical marketing conference being held in Chicago later that year. "Thought this might interest you professionally," he wrote. No pressure either way. The absence of expectations represented a subtle but significant shift. That evening, I called my mother for our scheduled bi-weekly conversation. For the first time, she didn't ask when I'd next visit Boston or suggest I wasn't making enough effort to maintain family connections. Instead, she listened as I described my current projects, asked relevant questions, and shared her own news without comparison or judgment. Small steps, imperfect progress, but real. The accidental phone call a year earlier had shattered my illusions about my family. The pain of that discovery had been excruciating but ultimately liberating. In losing the family I thought I had, I'd gained something more valuable: self-knowledge, authentic relationships, and the courage to stand firmly in my own worth. Family patterns don't break easily, and healing isn't a linear journey. But as I ended the call with my mother and texted Allison about our plans to meet at the Aspen house in the fall, I felt genuine gratitude for where this difficult path had led me. The family I now had might be more complicated and less idealized than the one I'd imagined, but it was real. And real, I'd learned, was ultimately better than perfect. If my story has resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family dynamics and the difficult journey toward authenticity. Have you ever discovered painful truths about your family relationships that ultimately led to growth? What boundaries have you established to protect your well-being while maintaining family connections? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story helped you feel less alone in navigating complex family situations, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing to my channel for more authentic conversations about family relationships, personal growth, and finding strength through difficult truths. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories that so many of us experience but rarely discuss openly. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and transformation. Remember that your worth isn't determined by others' perceptions, even those closest to you, and sometimes the most painful discoveries can ultimately lead to the most meaningful growth.